Just 11 days before the election, the announcement creating shockwaves. The FBI reopening the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email use. Director James Comey explaining in a letter to Congress, in connection with an unrelated case, the FBI has learned of the existence of emails that appear to be pertinent to the investigation. This just months after the initial investigation into the former Secretary of State's use of a private email account and server was closed.
I see evidence of great carelessness, but I do not see evidence that is sufficient to establish that Secretary Clinton or those with whom she was corresponding both talked about classified information on email and knew when they did it, they were doing something that was against the law.
The FBI has just sent a letter to Congress. They have discovered new emails pertaining to the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's investigation. They are reopening the case into her criminal and illegal conduct that threatens the security of the United States of America.
Great. Good afternoon. I'd like to say a few words and then take your questions. I have now seen Director Comey's letter to Congress. We are 11 days out from perhaps the most important national election of our lifetimes. Voting is already underway in our country. So the American people deserve to get the full and complete facts immediately. The director himself has said he doesn't know whether the emails referenced in his letter are significant or not. I'm confident, whatever they are, will not change the conclusion reached in July. Therefore, it's imperative that the Bureau explain this issue in question, whatever it is, without any delay.
Tonight, a CBS 2 investigation. Voters casting their ballots from the grave years after their death. We think of it as a part of Chicago's past. We even make jokes about it. But in an election year, when vote fraud is a campaign issue, 2 investigator Pam Zeckman found surprising answers to the question, do dead people vote in Chicago?
Susie Salee was buried in 1998, yet records show she voted 12 years later. Victor Croswell died in 1994, but records show he's voted 6 times since then. And then there's Floyd Stevens. Records show he voted 11 times since his death in 1993.
It's crazy. I don't see how people can be able to do something like that and get away with it.
Those are just a few of the cases we found by merging Chicago Board of Elections voter histories with the death master file from the Social Security Administration. In all, our analysis showed 119 dead people have voted a total of 229 times in the last decade. A Board of Election spokesman says a majority of the dead voters we found were most likely clerical errors involving family members with the same names and addresses.
This is not the bad old days. There are just a few instances here where a father came in for the son or a neighbor was given the wrong ballot application and signed it.
But in some cases, there was no clear explanation. Take Tadeusz Cisla. Records show he voted in 2010, but his nephew, Marek Cisla, says that's impossible.
He died in 1998.
Someone obviously voting for him.
That's a fraud.
Earl Smith says he reported the 1997 death of his father, also named Earl Smith. And it shows your father voting twice after he died.
Somebody missed the ball.
How antagonistic can US-Russian relations get from here if you're not satisfied with the approach that is taken by the next US president?
Well, no one would want to live in the conditions of another Cold War. I repeat it, it won't bring us any benefits. And of course would prefer to be optimistic about that. Would hope for the best. But if it happens, you mean? Well, Russia is a strong country, in spite of economic hardship. We're still quite a strong country that is capable of preserving its own national interests. And will do whatever is necessary to keep our national interests safe.
Russia says NATO's enhancement of military presence on its eastern side will not remain unanswered. Russia's permanent representative to the alliance said NATO's activities are clearly aimed at military force projection in the Black Sea and Eastern Europe. Alexander Grushko added that the biggest military buildup along Russia's borders since the Cold War has no anti-terrorism value and is not bolstering European security, rather it's creating additional obvious risks. He also warned of NATO and the United States' active exploration of the Black Sea waters with multifunctional combat platforms which have a serious strike and missile potential.
Russia's ongoing military campaign in Syria might have just cost it a seat on the United Nations Human Rights Council. Moscow lost its bid for a second term on the council to Hungary and Croatia. Human rights activists say Russia's support for the Syrian regime should disqualify the country from sitting on the council. Syria's government has been accused of indiscriminately bombing civilians throughout the nearly 6-year conflict. Saudi Arabia did win a seat on the council despite facing similar outcry over its involvement in Yemen.
Now let's begin with Yemen's Ansarullah fighters and their allied army units have launched a retaliatory attack against Saudi Arabia. A Yemeni TV station said the forces have launched a ballistic missile at an airport in the Saudi city of Jeddah. So far, there have been no report of casualties. Saudi Arabia says its defense system has intercepted a missile fired from the Yemeni province of Sada. But some reports say the missile has actually hit the airport and that a state of emergency has been announced in Jeddah.
As Syrian rebel forces announced the launch of a counterattack against government forces in Aleppo, Syria's foreign minister joined his Russian and Iranian counterparts in Moscow to discuss the conflict in the region. All three back Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in the civil war. Host Sergei Lavrov once again denied Russian involvement in the deadly bombing of a school in Idlib and said sanctions were to blame for the problems civilians face. Syrian Foreign Minister Walid al-Mualem spoke of the fight to retake the Iraqi city of Mosul from ISIL militants and the possible consequences for neighbouring Syria. Referring to the US-led coalition, he said, "They don't want to destroy ISIL. They want to pull ISIL from Mosul to Raqqa. So I'm happy to hear from Mr. Lavrov the confirmation that we'll prevent ISIL from reaching Raqqa."
Officials expect it could take months to liberate the Iraqi city of Mosul from the grip of ISIS. While that's happening on the ground, a different campaign is taking another route. A growing prayer movement is spreading throughout the Middle East. These houses of prayer are praying for God's plan to be fulfilled in perhaps the most volatile region on earth.
So we're just seeing an increase of hours of prayer meetings, both from believers, local believers, and also people outside praying for the Middle East and coming here to pray as well.
This is the Mesopotamia House of Prayer in northern Iraq, known in the Bible as Assyria. Co-founder Fabian Gresh says they're praying for the fulfillment of Isaiah 19, which says, "In that day Israel will be one of three with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the land, whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, Blessed is Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance."
So in order for that to happen, for Assyria, this region, the Middle East, all Muslim countries, to be a blessing on the earth, we need to become a habitation of the presence of God. And in order to be a habitation for the presence of God, God is building the altar of prayer and worship. And this is exactly what we're seeing in these prayer meetings.
With so much carnage in the region, this fulfillment might seem far-fetched. Gresh says in light of all the bad news, it's important to know where to look.
We are to look to Jesus. We are to look at God's promises in His Word, so we would be influenced by Him and not by what happens around us in this world. We easily get influenced by darkness and what happens and affects us. But if we look at Jesus and look at His Word, we see that God wants to pour out His Spirit. He's coming back for a bride, and He will have it even here in the Middle East. So we just simply need to look to Jesus, not be influenced by bad news, and hear good reports of what Jesus is doing. This way it stirs our hearts and gives us hope to believe for more.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Erbil, Northern Iraq.
The United Nations voted Thursday to start talks on a treaty that would ban nuclear weapons. 123 nations said they were in favor of the resolution, an overwhelming majority. Now the measure will go to a full General Assembly vote in December. The goal is to set up a conference in March to negotiate a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, leading towards their total elimination. Support for the treaty has been gaining steam during the past few months of negotiations, but the 9 known nuclear-armed nations, including the US, UK, and Russia, still have no interest. The Obama administration has firmly expressed its opposition to the resolution, citing security concerns. But the US does support the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which would stop countries from becoming nuclear and limit the creation of new weapons instead of banning them entirely.
China's defense ministry said Thursday Japanese military aircraft are increasingly engaging in dangerous intercepts of Chinese planes, putting the safety of Chinese flyers at risk and damaging bilateral relations. Japan reported earlier this month that between April 1st and September 30th, it had scrambled its warplanes 407 times. The scramblings were in reaction to increased Chinese military flights near Japanese airspace. That's almost double the number of intercepts Japan's Air Self-Defense Force made on Chinese aircraft in the same period in 2015. Colonel Wu Quan, spokesperson for China's Ministry of National Defense, said at a briefing on Thursday, such high-frequency reconnaissance against China not only disturbs the routine training of the Chinese military, but also undermines the security interests of China.
This week, Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte promised that he would stop swearing, saying God warned him on a recent flight to Japan that the flight would crash if he kept using bad language. The controversial Duterte, who is famous for profanity that has included outbursts at Pope Francis and U.S. President Barack Obama, explained that he heard a voice while on the plane and realized it was God telling him to clean up his act. Duterte emerged as a brash and unexpected candidate in a May election, which he won by a big margin, thanks to his promises to tackle problems in the Philippines, like drugs and crime.
6 months into a deepening drought across much of the South, the weather is killing crops, threatening cattle, and sinking lakes to their lowest level in years. The very worst conditions are in the mountains of northeast Alabama and northwest Georgia. Forecasters call the conditions in the region exceptional drought. The area is known for its thick green forests, waterfalls, and red clay soil. David Bailey had to sell half his cattle, more than 100 animals, for lack of hay in Alabama's scorched northeast corner. He says the last rain came on April 15th. Bailey added, "There's a bunch of people in a lot of bad shape here." The drought has spread from these mountains into the Piedmont Plateau, down to the plains and across 13 southern states, from Oklahoma and Texas to Florida and Virginia. According to Thursday's U.S. Drought Monitor, about 33 million people are in drought conditions.
Some 1.5 million people in southern Madagascar are facing hunger because of a severe drought. According to the United Nations, production of staple foods has declined sharply, resulting in higher food prices. The lack of sufficient rains in the southern region of Androy alone resulted in an 80% decline in maize production this year. In order to survive, residents are reported to be eating seeds and selling animals. The situation has been made worse by the El Niño weather phenomenon.
For the first time in centuries, people have entered what most Christians believe to be the tomb of Jesus, a restoration project on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, traditionally believed to be the place where the body of Jesus was laid for 3 days following his death, has officially begun in the Old City of Jerusalem. According to National Geographic, the marble slab that covers the tomb has been pulled back for the first time since 1555, if not before. After years of squabbling among religious groups, a project to repair the collapsing foundations of the church is finally underway. Archaeologists had to enter the tomb itself in order to stabilize the site with mortar and titanium bolts.
Religious freedom issues is a huge concern here in America with the presidential elections. Christian business owners have found themselves targeted simply for following their beliefs. Now they're coming together to fight this persecution.
None of these folks thought living their beliefs through their business would make them criminals in the eyes of the law.
And these Christians are spreading the word of how an aggressive gay rights agenda can threaten livelihood, savings, and even freedom. Spokane, Florida's Baronelle Stutzman faces losing everything. Washington State is trying to take all her assets because she refused to do the flowers for a longtime customer and friend's same-sex wedding.
Whether you're Christian or not, you have to be very much aware that the government is coming in trying to tell you what to think, what to do, how to act, what to believe, what to create. That is not a free America. When they can come in and bully you into an agenda, we do not have a constitution.
Kentucky has taken T-shirt printer Blaine Adamson to court for his refusing to print T-shirts for a pro-gay and lesbian festival.
So here's one more case like dozens of others across the country now, where a Christian business owner was treated as if he's doing wrong when he says all he's doing is backing up his beliefs.
He thinks all Americans need to be concerned.
I don't believe it's just Christians, but again, non-Christians, because our civil liberties travel together. And if the government forces me to speak a message, that's a scary thing, because as administrations change, as policies change, that same force could apply to someone who thinks totally different than me.
Calvin Cochran lost his job as Atlanta's fire chief after defending the biblical model of marriage in a private book written for a church men's group.
Regretfully, we're seeing a trend to where if you openly live out your faith, it could actually cost you your career or your business.
These owners of a Phoenix art studio are fighting a new city ordinance that could jail them if they ever refuse to do art or calligraphy for a same-sex wedding, or even publicize why they wouldn't. Their lead attorney, John Scruggs.
And it's very scary when the government has the power to tell a business or really anyone, you can post this statement on your website, on the internet. You can't post that statement.
Carrie Kupek represents Colorado baker Jack Phillips, found guilty by the state Civil Rights Commission for refusing to bake a cake for a gay wedding.
And they compare Jack to perpetrators of the Holocaust and slave owners. This was extra upsetting because Jack's father had fought in World War II and was part of the D-Day invasion.
Jesus has promised us that this kind of thing would happen at some point. So I think it's just a reality that as our culture changes and we hold to the truths of God, that we're going to face this kind of thing.
We no longer live in a free marketplace of ideas. We live in a society where the government can tell us what to say and believe. So that should be concerning for not just people of faith, of all faiths, but people of all beliefs.
But all these Christians say in this decaying culture, it's important to make stands like they have.
Jesus specifically said, if you deny me publicly, I'll deny you before my Father in heaven. So when we have to make a choice according to the way I was raised, when you got to make a choice between your faith and your job, you choose your faith.